In ancient Athens, there was a man named Diogenes who lived in the most unusual way. He had no house, no fancy possessions, no wealth. He lived inside a barrel with just a few dogs and owned nothing but his freedom. One day, Alexander the Great, the most powerful man of his time, came to see him. Alexander ruled over empires, commanded unstoppable armies, and conquered nations. Yet he stood before this strange philosopher and asked him what he wanted. Diogenes looked at him calmly and replied, "Stand out of my sunlight." That was all. He didn't ask for money, power, or luxury, just to not be blocked from the sun. Alexander later admitted something shocking. He said, "If I were not Alexander, I would wish to be Diogenes." Imagine that. The most powerful man in the world envied a man who had nothing. Why? Because Diogenes had something Alexander could never buy. No matter how many nations he conquered, he had complete sovereignty over his life. His existence was entirely his own. And here's the part that few ever tell you. There's a pattern hidden inside history, something you start to notice when you look closely. The men who changed the world, the most dangerous thinkers, the inventors, the builders of empires, they all shared a secret. And it's a secret that today's society has spent years convincing you is a weakness, a flaw, a sign that you are somehow incomplete. But what if everything you've been told about this is upside down? What if the thing you've been taught to run from, the thing you've been told to fear, is actually the ultimate source of strength? Here's the question that should stop you in your tracks. What if the life you read being pushed toward ice and tea leading you toward fulfillment, but into a carefully designed trap? Nietzsche understood this when he gave us one of the most brutal tests of all time. The idea of eternal recurrence. If you had to live this exact life over and over forever, would you agree to it? Most people would scream no. They would panic at the thought. Why? Because they're not living their own life. They're living someone else's version of it, following someone else's script, making compromises that don't belong to them, building a definition of success they didn't choose. But there is another kind of person, the kind who hears that challenge, looks it in the eye, and smiles. The kind who would gladly say yes, again and again, to living the exact same life. So what separates these two people? What makes one man recoil and the other embrace life fully? The answer is found in the greatest minds, the philosophers who saw through society's illusions. What I'm about to reveal will completely change how you think about power, purpose, and what it means to be complete as a human being. Nietzsche once wrote, "One must have chaos within oneself to give birth to a dancing star." Most people are just moving through life half asleep, acting out scripts handed down to them by family, by culture, by the expectations of others. And one of the most common scripts they follow is marriage. Marriage, in its traditional form, often represents the ultimate surrender, the agreement to be predictable, safe, and domesticated. But here's where Nietzsche's idea of the Birthplace comes in. The Birthplace isn't some kind of superhero out of a comic book. He's the individual who has the courage to create his own values, to step outside the categories society forces on him, and to live as his own moral authority. And this kind of life demands something very few people are willing to endure: solitude. Now, it's important to understand that solitude isn't the same as loneliness. Loneliness is the pain of an incomplete person who only feels whole when others notice them. Solitude, on the other hand, is where creators live. It is the space where real power is born. Think about Arthur Schopenhauer, one of the most brilliant philosophers in history. He never married, and his life was almost monastic in its discipline. His mornings were for writing, his afternoons for long walks, and his evenings for books, and his beloved poodle. People accused him of hating humanity, but Schopenhauer knew something most people never realize. A man can only truly be himself when he is alone. If he does not love solitude, he cannot love freedom, because solitude is the price of freedom. Ask yourself this: would Napoleon have conquered Europe if he spent every evening explaining his plans to Josephine and waiting for her approval? Would Einstein have redefined the universe if his priority was date night instead of hours of thought experiments? The man who is married has to filter every dream, every ambition through another person's fears, moods, and limitations. But the single man, his vision is pure, undiluted, dangerous. Marriage demands compromise. Greatness demands conviction. Marriage asks for consensus. Innovation asks for singular focus. Marriage asks you to be half of something. But some men were born to be whole, to be entirely themselves. Nietzsche believed that the will to power, the driving force of life, flows differently in the solitary individual. Instead of being absorbed by relationship struggles, it pours directly into creation, achievement, and self-overcoming. This path gives you no external validation. There are no medals, no applause, no constant feedback. Society gives praise to men who marry and raise families, but there is little applause for the man who masters himself. And yet, this is where greatness is born. The solitary man becomes his own compass, his own judge, his own inspiration. Nietzsche himself never married. He took all the intensity of his nature and poured it into philosophy that still shakes the world today. His concept of amor fati, the love of one's fate, was possible because his fate was his alone. This is what happens when you truly embrace this path. You start to feel the weight of your own mortality. Death is always there, just out of sight, between your heartbeats, behind your next breath. The Stoics understood this and used it as fuel. Memento mori, remember, you must die. Not as a grim obsession, but as rocket fuel for living fully. When you truly realize that your time is limited, every moment becomes more valuable. And every moment spent managing someone else's emotions, every hour spent negotiating whose turn it is to wash the dishes, becomes a moment stolen from your own becoming. Marcus Aurelius ruled the largest empire the world had ever seen, yet his most profound insights were written down in private during his own meditations. Alone with his thoughts, carrying the weight of existence, he found truths that a married man never has time to discover. A married man spends so much of his mental energy on partnership logistics that he rarely gets to sit in silence and confront himself. Aurelius wrote that you have power over your own mind, not over outside events. And when you finally understand this, you find strength. But here's the problem with modern relationships. Try explaining this to a man whose entire peace depends on his partner's moods. A man whose day can be ruined by a single argument. A man whose mental energy is constantly being drained by keeping another person emotionally regulated. The single man lives by what the Stoics called the dichotomy of control, focusing only on what he can control, his thoughts, his actions, his responses, and releasing everything else. The married man violates this rule almost daily, burning his energy trying to control things that are simply outside his power. Another person's feelings, reactions, and decisions. Socrates, considered one of the wisest men in history, was famously married to Xantippe, who was known for her sharp tongue and endless complaints. When someone asked him why he put up with her, Socrates said, "If you can get along with her, you can get along with anyone." Notice what he didn't say. He didn't say she made him happier or more fulfilled. He treated marriage like a test, like training for tolerance. But ask yourself, is that really how you want to spend your life? Using the most intimate relationship you have as practice for endurance, spending your limited time managing chaos instead of creating order. The Stoics taught something that most men today have forgotten. True peace cannot be negotiated with another person. It cannot be maintained through constant compromise. Peace comes from mastering yourself, and that requires focused attention. You cannot develop that kind of focus if you are constantly reacting to someone else's moods. Epictetus taught that life is like a play where you cannot choose the story, but you can choose how to act in it. The married man takes on a role that demands constant performance for a single-person audience. The single man writes his own script. Imagine standing in a wide, empty desert with no map, no guide, and no one to tell you what to do. Just you and the infinite horizon. That is the feeling of absolute freedom. Every step is your decision. Every direction is possible. Every mistake belongs entirely to you, and every victory is completely your creation. This is what philosophers called existential angst, the terrifying awareness that you are free, and therefore responsible for everything. Most people run from that feeling straight into marriage, into the comfort of a pre-made cage, where choices are shared, paths are predetermined, and freedom is traded for the illusion of security. But what if that feeling of angst, ice and tea something to escape? What if it's a gift? Jean-Paul Sartre said that existence comes first, and then we create who we are. We are not born with an essence. We create it with our choices. But marriage asks you to define yourself through compromise, through constant negotiation, smoothing out the sharp edges that make you who you are. The married man says, "I am a husband, a partner, a team player." Those are roles, masks you put on. The authentic man says, "I am what I choose to be, moment by moment." Emily Dickinson, one of the greatest poets ever to live, never married. She spent her life in solitude, and from that solitude came poetry that still shakes readers to this day. Her aloneness wasn't empty, it was full of possibility. Albert Camus looked at the absurd, the silence of the universe, and chose rebellion. He said the only way to live in an unfree world is to be so completely free that your very existence becomes an act of rebellion. Marriage, even at its best, is a kind of contract with unfreedom. It is a promise to limit your choices, to filter every decision through another person's needs, to compromise your vision so that harmony can be kept. Henry David Thoreau went to Walden Pond, not to escape humanity, but to discover what a human actually needs to live fully. "I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately," he wrote, "to live with intention, with choice. But marriage makes deliberate living hard, almost impossible. You are constantly reacting, adjusting, negotiating." Thoreau discovered he needed very little to be happy: a simple cabin, basic food, books, and the unlimited richness of his own mind. The married man discovers he needs more and more: a house that suits two tastes, furniture that fits two opinions, a life that works for two personalities. His needs multiply because they are no longer just his own. They are negotiated settlements. The emptiness most people fear, the silence that comes from being alone, is not a curse. It is the birthplace of real life. When there is no one left to impress, no one to argue with, no one to blame, that is when you finally discover what you actually want, who you actually are, and what you are truly capable of creating. And this is where one of the most dangerous lies ever told comes in: the idea that you need another person to complete you, that somewhere there is another half of you, a missing piece that will make you whole. Carl Jung would have laughed at this idea, then explained why it is one of the most destructive beliefs psychology has ever had to deal with. You've been told your whole life that happiness means finding the one, that you're incomplete until you meet your other half. That love is what finally makes you whole. But Jung, one of the deepest minds to ever live, knew the truth. Wholeness doesn't come from adding someone else to your life. It comes from becoming everything you already are, but haven't dared to face yet. Inside, you are opposites, masculine and feminine energies, light and shadow, your clear desires and your hidden fears, your rational mind and your wild emotional heart. Most men spend their lives running from half of themselves, pretending it doesn't exist. They hand it over to their partner to carry. They expect her to be the emotional one, the intuitive one, the nurturing one, while they play the role of the strong, rational, goal-driven man. At first, it feels like balance. She handles the feelings, you handle the logic. But this is an illusion. You're not whole. You've just outsourced half your soul, and that's why you keep feeling restless, why you feel like something's missing. Because something is missing, not out there, but inside you. The man who chooses the harder path, the man who chooses to stay single long enough to face himself, learns the language of his own soul. He learns to sit with his anger instead of exploding, to feel his sadness instead of numbing it, to dig into his fears instead of distracting himself. He learns to nurture himself, to be intuitive, to be emotionally intelligent. He doesn't need someone to translate his own feelings back to him, because he has become fluent in them. Arthur Schopenhauer saw this so clearly that he wrote, "Solitude is the fate of all great souls, not because they're cursed, not because they're broken, but because greatness requires self-confrontation. And you can do that if you're constantly managing someone else's moods, constantly negotiating your growth with another person's comfort zone. Here, what no one tells you, your shadow, the parts of you you've repressed and rejected, becomes toxic in a relationship if you don't own it. You start seeing it in her. You start blaming her for being too emotional, too dramatic, too demanding, when really, you're looking straight into the mirror of your own denied emotional life. But the man who lives alone has no one to project onto, no one to blame. When he's angry, he has to ask himself why. When he's scared, he has to trace that fear to its root. When he's in pain, he has to sit in it until he understands. And through this fire, he forges himself into something whole. Jung believed in synchronicity, those strange, meaningful coincidences that make you feel like life itself is talking to you. They show up most powerfully when you are alone, when your mind is still enough to see the invisible patterns connecting everything. And here where things get even deeper. Jung spoke about the archetypal energies every man carries: warrior, king, magician, lover. In relationships, these energies are constantly being shaped by compromise. But the man who stays single long enough can let these archetypes mature in their purest form. Your warrior fights for meaning, not just to win arguments. Your king rules his life without constantly negotiating every choice. Your magician explores the mysteries of existence without distraction. And your lover falls in love with life itself. Not just one person, but with beauty, creativity, and truth. This is what Jung meant when he said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Who you truly are isn't half of a couple. You are a complete, powerful, sovereign being, if you are willing to face yourself fully. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Most men will never do this work. Most will settle. They'll trade self-discovery for comfort, trade sovereignty for partnership, trade their sharpest edges for the warm, dull glow of compromise, and they'll call it happiness. Most men think power means money, muscles, or forcing others to do what you want. But the ones who really get it know that power is the ability to move silently, strategically, to get where you want to go without showing your hand. Marriage makes that almost impossible. Why? Because marriage requires transparency. You have to tell someone everything. You have to share your fears, your plans, your dreams. And that feels good, until you realize that it makes you predictable, vulnerable, easy to pressure. A married man's decisions are no longer just his own. His risks are filtered through what's safe for the family. His moves are slower because they have to be approved, explained, agreed on. But the single man, he's dangerous. He can pivot instantly. He can take bold risks because no one's comfort is at stake but his own. He can vanish when he needs to, strike when the timing is right. He is, in Machiavelli's words, a ghost in the machine. Florence Nightingale knew this when she rejected marriage to pursue her mission of saving lives. She wrote that she had an intellectual and moral nature that could not find satisfaction in a husband's life. She understood that changing the world required her full focus, and she was right. Her choice for solitude saved thousands. This is why the greatest creators, leaders, and visionaries often stay single. Not because they can't love, but because they refuse to trade their mission for comfort. Ayn Rand wrote characters who refuse to live for anyone else's approval. Because the man who lives for another has surrendered his orbit. He's no longer the center of his own gravitational field. And here's the truth. In every field that truly matters, business, politics, science, art, the most effective people maintain strategic mystery. They don't show their cards. They keep their options open. They stay free. Marriage is the ultimate commitment and the ultimate limitation. It tells the world exactly where to push if they want to control you. The single man, he is untouchable. But let's not lie to ourselves. This path is not easy. Solitude will test you. You will face nights when the silence feels heavy enough to crush you. You will wonder if you made the wrong choice. You will feel the pull to run back to comfort, to hand your soul to someone else, so you don't have to carry its weight alone. That is the price of becoming who you really are. Nietzsche called it the burden of great souls, the loneliness of refusing to live at the level of the masses. Most men will never feel this loneliness, because they never rise high enough to require it. They stay distracted, comfortable, numb. But the man who has tasted truth, who has wrestled with the biggest questions, who has seen through society's illusions, he cannot go back. History's greatest minds knew this. Schopenhauer spent his days dissecting human nature with surgical precision. Tesla stayed single so he could dedicate every dream, every waking hour, to electrifying the world. Literally. He said no thrill could compare to seeing an idea come alive. The philosopher Docente avoids marriage because he fears love. He avoids it because he loves truth, creation, and discovery more. Virginia Woolf said, "A woman must have money and a room of her own, if she is to write fiction." But this is true for everyone. You must have space, time, and psychological freedom to follow your thoughts wherever they lead. And that freedom has a cost. People will misunderstand you. They will call you selfish. They will say you are afraid of intimacy. They will say you are incomplete. Let them talk. While they dilute their potential for comfort, you will be building something no one can take from you. While they look for their missing half, you will discover you are always whole. This path is not for everyone. Most people will never choose it. But if you've made it this far, you're not most people. Something inside you is awake right now. You are standing at a crossroads. Down one path is the life society wrote for you. Find someone, fall in love, compromise your sharpest edges for harmony, build a safe life together. It's beautiful. Many take it. but you will always wonder what you might have been if you had faced the void alone. Down the other path is something rarer, something harder, something more dangerous, becoming fully yourself, without apology, without compromise, without asking permission. This is where true power is born, in the man who can stand alone, who can face chaos without running from it, who can create meaning from nothing. This path is not comfortable, but it is the only path where you can build something immortal, something that outlasts your body, something that justifies the fact that you are here at all. Write in the comments, "I choose myself." Let us see how many men are ready to stop living someone else's script and start writing their own. This is not the end of your story. This is where it finally begins.